Welcome to the Tales of Deception YouTube channel, where we explore fascinating stories and uncover the hidden sides of family and social relationships. Our channel offers you a deeper, more diverse perspective on life. Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned so you won't miss out on these surprising, emotional stories and valuable lessons. Today, I'm sharing a gripping story about betrayal and the inevitable changes in a relationship between two people who are about to get married. Let's dive right in.
I'd always thought our life together was solid, unshakable, even. We had our problems, sure. Who didn't? But nothing could prepare me for that night, when the darkness outside became the least unsettling thing about the evening. I remember the exact moment the world tilted on its axis. It was 3:12 a.m. The sharp sound of a car door slamming broke the silence. It wasn't the usual late-night neighborhood noise. It was right outside my bedroom window. That moment, I felt a cold wave of dread roll through me, and I sat up in bed, completely still, listening. Claire, my fiancée, wasn't beside me. The sheets were cold, empty. She wasn't home yet. I ran the events of the evening through my mind. Claire had gone to her best friend Olivia's bachelorette party. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She had told me she'd be back late, that she was having fun with the girls. I remember her laughing as she said, "Don't wait up. We'll just have some wine, maybe play a few dumb games." That was it. That was all she had said. But now, the coldness of the sheets felt more ominous than I could explain. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my gut. The coldness of the empty bed jolted me awake. I opened my eyes, and in that moment, I realized something clearly. Claire wasn't here. There was no steady breath beside me, no familiar warmth from her body as she slept soundly. I turned to look, but the bed was empty. Her pillow tossed aside, the blanket slightly pulled back. There was no sign of Claire. The absence made me feel strange, like something had shifted in the air that I couldn't quite put my finger on. 3:12 a.m. I looked at the clock. It had been quite a while since she left. I remembered her saying she'd be back late, that she was just going to have wine and play games with the girls. But now, there were no familiar sounds, no gentle goodbyes like always. She wasn't home. Everything was silent. No texts, no calls. Just a quiet that enveloped everything, as if the space itself was watching me, reminding me that something was wrong. This feeling, a vague yet distinct sense of unease, began to rise within me. I tried to convince myself that maybe she was just staying longer with her friends, that it was just a regular, fun party. But why did I feel like this? Why did it feel like I was standing at the edge of a truth I couldn't yet face? When I stood up from the bed, my feet touched the cold wooden floor, and the sensation became even more intense. The whole room seemed to be void of sound except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. The tension built up, and I couldn't calm myself. She should have been home by now. She promised it'd be late. But late didn't mean missing. This feeling, this growing sense of doubt, couldn't be suppressed. I moved toward the window, the air outside cold and still. I pulled back the curtains slowly, the dim light from the street lamp casting a strange, vacant glow on the pavement. But then I saw it. A black sedan parked by the street, the engine still running. The driver's side door was wide open, and no one was inside. My heart tightened. That wasn't a car I usually saw in this neighborhood. It was unfamiliar. It didn't belong to anyone here. I couldn't escape the thought that it was a sign, that something was off and I couldn't understand it. As I turned back and was about to step out of the room, I heard a faint click, like a door unlocking. The anxiety inside me grew. Not Claire. It couldn't be her. How could this be happening? A chill crept up my spine, as if the truth was about to burst forth, and I couldn't stop it. I stood still, trying to listen for footsteps from downstairs. No laughter, no gentle words like she usually says when she comes home. All I could hear was the sound of something shifting in the stillness of the house, as if someone was entering quietly, trying not to be noticed. A figure stepped into the room. She was back, but it wasn't the Claire I knew. I knew instantly, and I felt like I was drifting into a nightmare. She walked into the house with a strange, unsettling calmness, no rush, no sign of weariness, no clumsy gestures of someone coming back from a long night. She moved so carefully, so quietly, that I felt like she had done this many times before. Every movement, every step she took was filled with control, as if everything had been planned in advance. When she took off her shoes, there was no sound. What was strange was how she didn't seem in any hurry. Her actions were so calm, so composed, as if nothing was wrong, as if she wasn't afraid of anything. I stood there, unable to move. The anxiety inside me grew to a peak. My heart raced, and I felt like I was standing before a door I didn't want to open, but couldn't do anything to stop myself from walking through. I knew something was very wrong, and I couldn't pretend any longer. The longer I watched her, the more unsettling it became. Claire's appearance was different. The makeup on her face was smudged, her hair a bit disheveled, as though she had been running her hands through it repeatedly, trying to regain composure. Her dress, a short black number, wasn't the one she had left the house in. It looked like it had been worn longer than just a few hours. The fabric clung to her body in a way that didn't seem right. Something about her manner was off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the way she moved, the way she breathed, the way she didn't even glance in my direction, it all felt wrong. Like she was deliberately avoiding me, like she was hiding something. And then it hit me. She smelled like cologne, but it wasn't mine. The realization hit me like a slap to the face. The sickly sweet fragrance of someone else lingered in the air, faint but undeniable. I had never seen her wear this scent before. I tried to fight the wave of nausea that hit me, tried to push it down, but it was impossible. My mind scrambled for an innocent explanation. Maybe she'd hugged someone? Maybe it was just a casual touch, something that could easily be explained away. But no, that wasn't it. No. The way her scent lingered around her told me everything I needed to know. The way her actions had been too deliberate, too practiced, too rehearsed. It wasn't just a slip-up. This wasn't an accident. Claire wasn't just out with the girls, as she had told me. She had been with someone else. She stood in the entryway, completely unaware that I was watching her. Her back was turned as she placed her purse down on the counter, and then she took a slow, deliberate breath, as if she was trying to calm herself after some invisible storm. Her movements were too calm, too practiced. She was in control of herself, too much so for someone who should have been coming home from a fun night with friends. It was like she knew exactly what she was doing, like she had done this before. The image of her so perfectly composed, standing in our kitchen, acting like nothing was wrong, while I stood frozen in the shadows, unable to take my eyes off her, filled me with a rising sense of dread. I couldn't breathe. I had to know the truth. This silence was suffocating. My body was screaming for me to confront her, to demand answers, but I couldn't move. I couldn't open my mouth. I just stood there, watching, waiting for something, anything, that would give me the courage to face this head-on. I retreated to the bathroom, my footsteps quick and light, hoping she wouldn't notice the way my hands were trembling. I grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking as I unlocked it. I could feel my pulse hammering in my chest, my mind racing with possibilities. I hesitated for a moment before opening the message from Mia, Claire's old friend. Mia had sent it earlier, but I dismissed it. I assumed she was just stirring up trouble, being dramatic. I hadn't wanted to believe anything bad about Claire. But now, as I unlocked the message, I could feel something deep within me brace for impact. The photo that loaded in front of me was undeniable. There was Claire, sitting at a bar, leaning into a man who had his arm wrapped around her waist. She wasn't just casually sitting there with someone. No, she was leaning into him, her face turned up toward him in a way that was all too familiar. That wasn't Olivia's party. That wasn't just some harmless girls' night out. This was something else. A cold realization settled in my stomach. My thoughts scattered, unable to form a coherent sentence as the truth slowly unraveled before me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Claire had been lying to me. She had been hiding something from me, something so much darker than I could have ever imagined. The image burned itself into my mind. It wasn't just a picture. It was the truth laid bare in front of me, a truth that I had been blind to all this time. My entire world, the trust one had placed in her, was beginning to crack and break apart. Everything was starting to unravel. I felt sick. My stomach churned with the weight of betrayal, my body heavy as if I were carrying a burden that had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. The realization of Claire's lies crushed me, but I forced myself to focus. She was downstairs, still moving about the house, unaware that the storm was about to break. The truth had already slammed into my mind like a freight train, and now I had no choice but to face it. No more running away. No more pretending everything was fine. I stepped out of the shadows, the silence in the house amplifying each step I took. My feet barely made a sound on the cold hardwood floor, but my heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. I heard the soft sound of glass meeting the counter, the faint trickle of water being poured into a glass. Claire was in the kitchen, pretending that nothing was wrong. She was pretending that nothing had changed, that everything was just as it was before. The audacity, the calmness, it made my blood boil. How could she be so cold, so indifferent after what I had just discovered? How could she act like I didn't know the truth? I stood there, at the entrance to the kitchen, watching her as she took a sip of the water, her back to me. She was still unaware, lost in the normalcy she was trying to maintain. And I realized then, with a sinking feeling in my stomach, that this wasn't just a one-time mistake. This was a pattern. She had done this before. She had been lying to me for far too long, and I had been too blind to see it. She finally turned around, and for a split second, I saw it. An almost imperceptible flicker of surprise in her eyes when she saw me standing there. But it was gone as quickly as it had come. She recovered, straightened up, and placed the glass down on the counter with practiced ease. "Hey," she said, her voice light, as though nothing was wrong. "I didn't think you'd still be awake." It was like a slap in the face. The calmness in her voice, the ease in her demeanor. It was like nothing had changed. I stood there, my body stiff with anger, unable to comprehend how she could look me in the eye and pretend that I didn't know, pretend like I hadn't seen everything. I held her gaze, my eyes unwavering. There was no way I was letting her get away with this. I was done pretending too. "What time did you get home?" I asked, my voice steady, but inside I felt like everything was unraveling. She looked at the clock on the stove, her eyes shifting quickly. "Late. We lost track of time," she replied, shrugging as though it were the most normal thing in the world. Olivia opened another bottle of wine. It was such a ridiculous lie. A lie so thin, it was almost laughable. I didn't believe her for a second. There was no sincerity in her words, no hint of guilt, just a casualness that made me feel sick. My whole body felt like it was about to combust with frustration, but I swallowed it down. I wouldn't let her see that I was losing control. I didn't say anything at first. I just watched her, my mind racing, my heart pounding. I was waiting for her to slip up, for some crack in the perfect mask she was wearing. Every moment that passed, the more my anger built, but I knew I had to stay calm. I had to make her face the truth. She started to step toward the living room, completely unaware of the storm that was coming. The silence between us stretched out, but all I could hear was the thumping of my own heartbeat. I was waiting for her to let something slip, waiting for her to fumble, to show me the real Claire. The seconds dragged on like hours. My eyes never left her, but I wasn't looking for her to tell me the truth right away. I was looking for the cracks in her story, the nervous twitch of her hand, the small hesitation in her speech. Anything that would confirm what I already knew. And then, in a moment that felt like an eternity, she did it. She glanced down at her phone, and for the briefest moment, I saw a flash of panic in her eyes. It was barely there, but it was enough. Enough to tell me that she knew she couldn't keep lying. She couldn't keep pretending. She knew I was onto her. I could feel it. The tension, the weight of what was about to happen. The silence had broken, and I wasn't going to let her hide anymore. It wasn't just the lies anymore. It was the complete disregard for me, for everything we had. Claire's actions weren't just mistakes. They were calculated, and they were cold. She had been deceiving me for weeks, and the realization hit me harder than anything I could have ever prepared for. The weight of it was unbearable. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving only the suffocating feeling of betrayal. I stood there, trying to steady myself, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't look away from her, even as my whole body screamed at me to leave, to walk away from this nightmare. But I couldn't. Not now. Not when I finally had the strength to confront her. "Claire," I said quietly, my voice steady but cold, cutting through the thick silence that had settled between us. "This isn't the first time, is it?" Her smile faltered. For the briefest moment, I saw a flicker of uncertainty, something that made my blood run cold. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice cracking just slightly. I leaned forward, forcing myself to meet her gaze, not letting her look away. My heart was still racing, but I had never been more sure of anything in my life. "I know about him. I know what you've been doing. You've been lying to me for weeks, haven't you?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she seemed to lose her composure. The words were on the tip of her tongue, but they didn't come. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her face shifted. What was once confident now looked like pure fear. She took a step back, as though trying to escape the truth that I had just laid bare. But there was no escape. Not anymore. "Please." She started, but I cut her off, my voice sharp as a blade. Don't insult me by pretending this was just a mistake," I said, each word like a punch to the gut. "A mistake is something you regret immediately. What you've been doing is something else. This is betrayal." Her face turned pale, and for the first time since I had walked into this house, I saw her falter. She was trying to hold it together, but I could see it in her eyes. She knew she couldn't hide it anymore. No more lies. No more excuses. The anger that had been bubbling under the surface finally broke free, but I kept it contained. I didn't want her to see how much she had hurt me. Not yet. Not until I said what I needed to say. I took out my phone and held it up, opening the message from Mia that I had received earlier. The photo loaded in front of me. Claire sitting at a bar, intimately close with a man, his arm around her waist, their eyes locked in a way that made it clear this wasn't just a casual encounter. "You think I don't know?" I asked, my voice no longer negotiable. "Here's the proof. Claire, you can't deny it anymore." Her gaze flickered to the photo in my hand, and I saw real fear in her eyes. She took another step back, but there was no escaping the truth. She knew I knew everything. "I'm sorry, don't do this," she stammered, but I didn't listen anymore. I didn't want to hear any more excuses from her. "No, you have no right to ask for anything anymore," I said, my voice now firm like stone. "You've been lying to me for far too long. It's over, Claire." I turned and walked toward the living room. My footsteps echoed through the empty house, each one a reminder of the distance between us, of everything that had happened and everything that was now falling apart. It all felt surreal, like I was living in a nightmare I couldn't escape. I had always thought we were strong, unshakable, but I had been living in a lie, and now everything was crumbling before my eyes. I turned back to face her, and this time, my words were final. "Pack your things. I don't want you here anymore." Her face crumpled, her expression breaking in a way that felt almost too late. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, I almost felt guilty. Almost. "Please, don't do this. We can talk about it." I shook my head slowly, as if I couldn't believe what was happening. "No. We're done, Claire. It's over." My voice was steady, unwavering. I didn't know how many times I needed to say it before it sank in, but I knew that this was the only way forward. The only way to let go of the person I thought I knew. The person I thought I loved. I stood there, watching her crumble before me, and for the first time in so long, I felt relief. It wasn't the relief of forgiveness or closure. It was the relief of finally breaking free. The weight I had carried for so long, for so many months, had been lifted. And as Claire stood there, begging me for another chance, I realized that the love I had for her was no longer enough. Trust, respect, everything had been shattered beyond repair. "I'm done," I repeated, this time softer. And without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the living room, clutching onto nothing. I watched her scramble to pack her bags, her hands trembling as she rushed through the motions. She had always been meticulous, careful, But now there was nothing graceful about the way she moved. Her eyes darted from one item to the next, as though she couldn't even remember what she was taking with her. Clothes, shoes, toiletries, all thrown together in a frantic mess. She was acting as if she didn't care. But I saw the way her fingers shook, the way she bit her lip to hold back the sobs that threatened to spill over. But I was calm, a calmness that scared me. The rage inside me had already cooled into something else, something final. The anger, the hurt, the confusion. Everything that had been bubbling inside me for so long had finally settled into an empty, hollow calm. Claire was no longer the person I had once loved. She was someone else, someone who had betrayed me in a way I couldn't have imagined. The woman I knew was gone, replaced by someone capable of such deceit. I stayed silent, watching her, but not feeling any of the pain I once might have. I felt nothing. No more anger. No more love. Just an overwhelming, numbing emptiness. I had given her everything. I had trusted her with my heart, and she had broken it. I couldn't bring myself to say anything. What was left to say? 5 minutes later, she stood in the entryway, her bag slung over her shoulder, her face streaked with tears. She looked so different from the woman I once loved. There was no softness in her expression, no trace of the warmth I had seen when we first met, only emptiness. She had no words left, nothing to say to make it right. Her eyes, red from crying, met mine for a brief moment, but all I saw was a woman who knew that it was over. I stood there, my heart heavy with the weight of the finality, but my voice was steady. "Goodbye," I said, my voice firm. No hesitation. No second chances. It was the end of the illusion. The life we had built, the trust we had shared, everything that once seemed real was now gone. Without another word, I closed the door behind her. The click of the lock echoed in the quiet of the house, and the finality of that sound seemed to reverberate through my entire being. The silence that followed was deafening. It was so complete, so total, that for a moment I wondered if I had made the right choice. But then it hit me. The silence wasn't a void. It wasn't something I feared. For the first time in a long time, it felt like freedom. I felt the weight lifting from my chest, the suffocating pressure that had been building for so long finally releasing. I wasn't sure where I was going from here, but I knew this was the right decision. Claire was gone, and with her, the illusion of the life I thought I had. I didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in ages, I could breathe, and that was all I needed.
And so, today's story comes to an end, but the lesson it brings will linger on. It serves as a reminder about the truth in relationships, about the trust and respect each individual needs. Sometimes, the things we believe in the most are the very things that can be broken. What are your thoughts on this story? Feel free to leave your comments or feedback below this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss out on more fascinating and emotional stories in the upcoming episodes.